Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a short, highly provocative, and, frankly, just a fascinating philosophical text.
Yeah, it really is.
It's by an author named Shuefeng, written in March of 2023. And the title alone is, well, it's a total head-turner. It's called US Dollar, Bitcoin, F-Coin. Who is more powerful and has more future?
Right, and the premise immediately challenges something that, you, the listener, interact with every single day.
Oh, constantly.
Think about your morning routine, right? You walk into a cafe, you order a coffee, and you tap a little plastic card against a plastic machine.
Yeah.
You hear that tiny beep, and suddenly you're allowed to walk away with a hot beverage. It feels, so solid, so incredibly absolute. We really crave that certainty.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you pause for just a second, the entire interaction you just described is essentially uh, a ghost story that we all just agreed to believe in.
A ghost story, exactly.
There is no physical gold-changing hands there. There's no tangible transfer of energy. It is literally just invisible digital numbers shifting from one bank server to another bank server.
Yeah, it's all digital.
So, you, the listener, are participating in this massive collective illusion every single time you buy groceries.
Right, and stripping away the technology reveals that the illusion is constructed entirely out of trust. And the author of our source text, Shuefeng, uses this exact realization to break down the fundamental nature of value. The text categorizes human exchange into three distinct paradigms, basically to force us to ask what actually gives those invisible digital numbers their power.
Right, so we have traditional fiat currency, which is the system we are all, currently swimming in.
Yeah, the baseline.
Then we have cryptocurrency, the supposed decentralized savior that has been dominating headlines for a decade. And finally, the text introduces this highly unusual, deeply mysterious third paradigm referred to simply as F-Coin.
Yeah, F-Coin. But we should probably start with the baseline of what we currently understand as money. Shuefeng groups all major national currencies into a single bucket.
Right.
So that's the US dollar, the euro, the British pound, the Japanese yen, the Chinese RMB. For most of us, these currencies feel like the bedrock of reality.
Oh, for sure. They dictate where we live, what we eat, how we spend our waking hours.
Exactly. But the text points out a critical underlying truth about that bedrock, which is that none of those currencies have any intrinsic value.
None at all.
Right. They are not backed by physical assets locked in a vault somewhere. They are solely supported by institutional credit.
And let's actually define what institutional credit means in this context, because it's easy to just say, oh, the government promises it has value.
Yeah, it goes much deeper than just a simple promise.
Right. A fiat currency's value is maintained by a nation's ability to levy taxes, its capacity to enforce laws, and its overall economic output.
Exactly. The dollar in your pocket has value because the U.S. government demands that taxes be paid in dollars. And they have the institutional enforcement mechanisms, courts, police, and ultimately the military to ensure that demand is met.
So fiat currency isn't so much a measure of stored wealth as it is like a measure of faith in a specific government's future stability and productivity.
That's a great way to put it.
It's an ecosystem entirely dependent on trusting centralized human institutions to just not mismanage the massive ledger of global debts.
Right, and the author argues that if that institutional credit weakens, the currency loses its magic. It literally turns into, and I'm quoting the text here, waste paper.
Waste paper, which makes me view traditional fiat currency less like a solid foundation and more like, a massive global game of Jenga.
Oh, interesting. A game of Jenga.
Yeah. It looks perfectly solid until a government pulls out the wrong block of credit and the whole thing just collapses into waste paper. As long as the government maintains its authority and its productive engine, the hallucination holds.
But when it doesn't hold?
Right. The text provides this harrowing, real-world example of what happens when that productive engine stalls and the credit collapses. 7 points specifically to Zimbabwe.
Yeah, and the numbers presented in the source material are they're staggering.
Totally.
In 1993, 150,000 Zimbabwean dollars could buy a whole villa in the capital city of Harare.
Wow, a whole villa.
A whole villa. We are talking about the physical security of a large house, a substantial amount of wealth, represented by that specific number, 150,000.
But then the institutional credit backing that currency broke.
It broke completely.
And by 2009, the text notes that the exact same amount, 150,000 Zimbabwean dollars, could no longer buy a villa. It can only buy a single roll of toilet paper.
A single roll. To understand how a catastrophe like that actually happens mechanically, we have to look at hyperinflation.
Right.
When the Zimbabwean government faced massive debts and a collapsing productive economy, they still needed to pay their obligations.
Yeah, they have bills to pay.
Exactly. And because their currency wasn't tied to a physical resource like gold, the central authorities simply printed more money to cover the gap.
They just added zeros to the paper.
They flooded the system with new currency. And when you exponentially increase the supply of a currency without a corresponding increase in actual goods and services like, food, houses, labor.
The purchasing power of every existing note just plummets.
Right. The physical notes didn't change. The number 150,000 didn't change. What evaporated was the underlying institutional credit, making the money so abundant it became effectively worthless.
I mean, if fiat is just an institutional promise susceptible to that kind of catastrophic mismanagement, isn't it terrifying that our entire modern existence depends on hoping that promise isn't broken?
It is deeply unsettling.
Like our mortgages, our groceries, our life savings, it all depends entirely on hoping a centralized authority doesn't quietly pull the rug out from under us. We place all our material security into the hands of a few central bankers and politicians.
Yeah, and witnessing a villa turn into a roll of toilet paper creates a profound psychological scar on the global consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
People naturally seek an alternative outside of government control. If the problem is central authority arbitrarily printing money and destroying value, well, the logical reaction is to build a system where central authority doesn't exist.
Which brings us directly into Shuifeng's second category of value cryptocurrency.
Right.
The text groups all encrypted virtual currencies together here, specifically naming Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polkadot, Ripple, and Litecoin.
All the big ones.
Yeah. And unlike fiat, which requires the enforcement mechanisms of a state, the author states these are backed purely by people's recognition, by consensus.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is identifying a fundamental shift in where humanity places its trust. In the fiat system, you're forced to trust the state. In the crypto system, you choose to trust the crowd.
But Shuifeng does not seem to view the crowd as a particularly stable foundation either.
Not at all.
The text makes a direct comparison between modern cryptocurrency and the famous Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century.
Yeah, the tulip bubble is the ultimate historical case study in the mechanics of speculative consensus.
It's wild.
During the Dutch Golden Age, people literally began trading the price of a luxury mansion for a single tulip bulb.
A flower bulb.
A flower bulb. The bulb itself had no practical utility. It couldn't feed you, it couldn't shelter you. Its entire value derived from a psychological phenomenon known in economics as the greater fool theory.
Right. The idea that you only buy an astronomically expensive tulip bulb because you believe a quote-unquote greater fool will come along tomorrow and pay you even more for it.
Exactly. The value is entirely divorced from utility. Shuifeng argues that if people collectively recognize the value of a virtual currency, it can absolutely become more expensive than gold itself.
Yeah.
But because it relies completely on that collective psychological recognition, a sudden shift in sentiment destroys the asset. The text describes this fragility beautifully, calling these currencies bubbles on the waves.
Bubbles on the waves. I mean, it is incredibly poetic, but it is an absolute nightmare scenario if your retirement fund is tied up in those bubbles.
Oh, a total nightmare. When the pool of willing buyers dries up, when those greater fools stop appearing, the bubble bursts.
Yeah.
The author notes that when this happens, leading to millions losing everything and going bankrupt, the currency becomes worse than dirt.
Worse than dirt.
Yeah. The analysis here suggests that moving from fiat to crypto is merely trading the risk of institutional failure for the risk of collective psychological failure. It is pure, fragile consensus that only exists because we all happen to agree it exists in this exact moment.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge the author's dismissive view of consensus here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't collective belief exactly what gives anything value?
I mean,
Even a physical bar of gold is really just a heavy, shiny rock, right? You can't eat gold. You can't build a sturdy house out of it. It only has immense purchasing power because human beings have spent thousands of years collectively agreeing that it is precious.
that's a fair point.
I tend to view the entire crypto market as a global game of Tinkerbell.
Tinkerbell, like the fairy.
Yeah, like in the play Peter Pan, where the fairy's survival depends on audience participation.
Oh, right.
Think about it. Tinkerbell drinks poison and starts dying on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Pan turns to the audience and says that to save her Everyone has to clap if they believe in fairies.
Yes.
And the clapping literally brings her back to life. That is the perfect mechanism for cryptocurrency. The coin only stays in the air. It only has life and purchasing power as long as millions of people around the world keep clapping.
That's a brilliant analogy. Market sentiment visualized as a theatrical audience keeping a fairy alive.
Exactly.
The clapping is the literal recognition Feng talks about.
But it is exhausting to keep clapping forever, right? And if we look at the source text, the author seems to know this.
Definitely.
If institutional credit, like the government's promise, can bankrupt your country, and if collective belief, the Tinkerbell effect, can pop like a soap bubble on a wave, well, you are left staring into a terrifying void.
Yeah, what's left?
Exactly. What happens when you strip away both the government's tanks and the crowd's clapping?
Well, that exact philosophical void is what the author intends to fill with this third paradigm. Feng introduces a truly radical option to the reader, calling it F-coin.
F-coin. The document abruptly shifts here from a traditional economic critique into something much deeper, kind of blending reality and virtuality.
It's a huge shift.
The text defines F-coin as a heavenly currency. That is immediately a wild departure from the US dollar or Bitcoin. It describes F-coin as a currency that bridges the physical world and the spiritual or virtual world, specifically to guarantee a person's survival needs.
Right, and the mechanism of creation is what sets it completely apart from anything we've discussed so far.
Okay.
You aren't mining F-coin with a massive energy-draining server farm, and a central bank isn't printing it on an industrial press. The text explicitly states F-coin is not printed by a machine.
So where does it come from?
You are your own F-coin printing machine.
Oh, wow.
You mint this currency purely through your own words and deeds.
Minted by my own words and deeds.
Exactly. This raises an important question regarding how we even define wealth.
Yeah.
The author is completely shifting the concept of currency from an external system of exchange, like a bank or a digital ledger, into a deeply internal accounting of personal moral action.
Right.
It is the ultimate form of decentralization, taken all the way down to the level of the individual human soul.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of this, the closest analogy I can come up with is karma.
Karma, yes.
But karma visualized as an unhackable biological blockchain.
That's a fascinating way to put it.
Because the text goes into incredible detail about the security features of F-coin, and it reads almost like a technical white paper for a spiritual asset.
Yeah, and the security features described are absolute precisely because the currency is untethered from external human-made systems.
Exactly. The text outlines that F-coin cannot circulate in the traditional market.
Right.
You cannot log on to an exchange and trade it for dollars. It cannot be loaned out to a friend with interest, and it cannot be transferred to someone else's account.
It's entirely yours.
But the trade-off for that total lack of liquidity is perfect, incorruptible security. Financial institutions cannot defraud you of it. It never devalues because there is no central bank printing more of it. Thieves cannot break into your house and steal it.
And because it isn't a digital asset stored on a mobile phone or a hardware wallet, digital scammers and hackers are completely powerless against it.
They can't touch it.
Right. It is entirely immune to the volatility of the outside world.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on the fundamental premise the author is building here.
Go for it.
If it cannot be traded, if I can't loan it out, if I can't transfer it to my children or spend it at the grocery store to buy bread,
Yeah.
can we even call it a currency at all? I mean, isn't the very definition of a currency meant to be a medium of exchange?
It's a valid question.
If I am just hoarding a personal high score of my own good deeds, it sounds like a gold star on a cosmic refrigerator. What is the actual tangible utility?
Well, the author actually anticipates that exact skepticism.
Well, they do.
Yeah. If a currency lacks a traditional market where you can swap it for goods, what is its purchasing power, right? Why would any rational human being exert the daily energy required to mint it through their words and deeds?
Exactly.
The text answers this by promising an ultimate, unparalleled payoff.
And what's the payoff?
The final segment of Feng's argument states that once a person accumulates a certain unspecified amount of F-coin, they gain access to something called a human heaven, or a worldly paradise.
A human heaven. So we have moved from attempting to buy a villa in Zimbabwe with paper money to buying access to heaven on earth with behavioral merits.
That is exactly the progression, and the text is highly specific about what this worldly paradise entails.
Okay.
It does not describe a vague spiritual peace or an afterlife. It describes absolute material security in the present reality.
The text explicitly lists that in this paradise, absolutely everything is prepared for you.
Everything.
It covers all material needs for food, clothing, housing, and transportation.
Eliminating the daily friction of survival. Think about the psychological burden of securing those four things.
Massive.
Right. The constant anxiety over rent, groceries, and car payments is the primary driver of our reliance on the US dollar or Bitcoin in the first place.
And it goes further than just daily goods. The text states that this worldly paradise entirely covers the human life cycle stages of birth, aging, illness, and death.
Yeah, Fcoin acts as the ultimate foolproof safety net. Let's actually analyze what fiat and crypto are used for by the average person.
Okay.
There are tools we frantically accumulate to try and secure material comfort in a deeply unpredictable world.
Right.
We hoard dollars because we are terrified of getting sick and not being able to afford a doctor. We speculate on crypto because we are terrified of growing old and slipping into poverty.
We are trying to build a shield against the tragedy of the human condition, but we are building it out of paper and bubbles.
Precisely. Our current tools for security rely on highly precarious external markets that, as the author systematically proved in the first two sections, they can collapse into hyperinflationary waste paper or speculative dirt.
Wow.
Fcoin bypasses the precarious market entirely. It promises absolute cradle-to-grave material security purely through one's own behavioral merits.
So what does this all mean? Earning F-Coin sounds like securing a VIP access pass to an all-inclusive cosmic resort.
A cosmic resort, yeah.
The food is free, the healthcare is covered, your retirement is sorted, but the bouncer at the door doesn't accept cash or Bitcoin. The only accepted currency is the cumulative quality of your daily behavior.
The elegant philosophical construct here is that it aligns personal morality directly with ultimate survival. It completely removes the middleman of money.
The author is a master of suspense, though.
Oh, without a doubt.
Sweffing builds this incredibly compelling argument for the superiority of Fcoin over our modern financial systems, and then completely leaves the reader hanging. The document ends on a literal cliffhanger.
It really does. It poses a direct question to the reader and then provides a cryptic signpost instead of an answer.
Right. The text ends by asking if you want to know how to actually acquire Fcoin, and then it just points you to an entirely different text called The Acquisition and Depletion of Fcoin.
Yeah.
It's the philosophical equivalent of saying, tune in next week to find out how to survive. It's incredibly savvy writing designed to pull you deeper into the author's ecosystem.
The cliffhanger ensures engagement, certainly. But even standing on its own, this core document leaves us with a profound framework to reconsider our daily interactions with value.
Yeah. Looking at the big picture Sweffeng has painted for us, we are presented with a fascinating trinity of human exchange. 3 distinct paradigms attempting to solve the same problem of survival.
First, we have the fragile institutional credit of fiat currency.
A system that forces us to remember those 150,000 Zimbabwean dollars. A sobering reminder that a luxury villa can devolve into a single roll of toilet paper the moment a government's promise breaks under the weight of its own mismanagement.
Second, we have the fickle psychological consensus of cryptocurrency.
The modern equivalent of the Dutch tulip mania. We trade the centralized risk of the state for the decentralized risk of the crowd, participating in this global game of Tinkerbell that is always one panic away from bursting into bubbles on the waves.
And finally, we have the radical proposition of Fcoin.
The untransferable, unhackable heavenly currency. Minted solely by your own words and deeds, immune to thieves and inflation, promising access to a worldly paradise where every material and life cycle need is met from birth to death.
3 profoundly different answers to the question of what gives numbers their power over us.
So we turn Sweffeng's final challenge directly to you, the listener. Which of these currencies do you think is more powerful and has more of a future? When you look at your own life, the hours you work, the stress you carry, where are you actually investing your daily energy? Are you placing all your faith in the institutional credit of a central bank? Are you betting your future on the psychological consensus of an anonymous crowd? Or are you focused on minting value through your own actions and deeds?
Consider one final thought regarding the mechanics of Fcoin before you answer that.
Oh.
The author frames it as a heavenly currency that bridges reality and virtuality. But if F-Coin is minted exclusively by our words and deeds, and its ultimate payoff is that we are sheltered, fed, and cared for when we are sick or aging in a worldly paradise,
Yeah.
could that paradise actually just be a metaphor for community reputation?
Wait, really? If you strip away the mystical terminology?
Exactly. F-Coin might not be some magical ledger recorded in the cosmos. It likely represents the very real, highly tangible social safety net of goodwill that you build over a lifetime of interacting with others.
Yeah.
Think about the mechanics of human society. If you treat people well, if your words and deeds consistently build trust, your community takes care of you when you are vulnerable.
Right, they bring you food when you are hungry.
They support you when you are sick. They visit you when you're aging. In that sense, making your own behavior the most secure, unhackable currency on Earth isn't a supernatural promise.
It's just the deepest, most pragmatic truth of human connection.
Exactly.
Which means the next time you tap that plastic card for your morning coffee, you might just find yourself wondering, is the invisible banking network processing your payment nearly as powerful as the way you treat the barista handing it to you?